Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir, Daf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Blima Slitsky in memory of her mother, Mazal, Tina Bat, Rina, and David. Today's daf is dedicated in memory of those murdered in the terrorist attack on Friday night in Neve Yaakov, and for Refuah Shlema to those injured there and from the attack in Ir David. Prayers for with their families. Okay, we're going to get started. We're actually continuing, and I recommend you use the study guide today. It'll be helpful. We're continuing a slew of questions against Barpada. Again, I want to go over the structure of what we had yesterday. I want to point out, by the way, I forgot to mention this, all the Mishnayot that we're quoting, we're going to have 5 in total, actually maybe even 6, but 5 right now as against Barpada. And they're all Mishnayot, and we're basically going in order, the Mishnayot in the 3rd chapter. So if you open the 3rd chapter of Masechet Nazir, you'll see one by one all those Mishnayot. So when we get there, it'll be nice. We've already learned them. And we're going to basically be going against Barpada. Who's Barpada? So we have Machloket, Rav Matna, and Barpada, where we learn stam nezirut, 30 yom, or maybe 29 ayim. So we had, Rav Matna says it's 30 days, Gematria Yihiyeh. Kadosh Yihiyeh, the Nazir will be sanctified, will be, is Yihiyeh, in Gematria, the numeric value of the letters adds up to 30. Then we have Barpada, who says, no, we learn it from the 29 times it says the root Nazir in the chapter. And therefore, 29 days, which also fits in with both of them are really relating to a month. It's just whether, right, this is again, someone who takes on nezirut with a stam nezirut, which means no specific time frame. I just said, I'm going to be a Nazir. Standard is I'm a Nazir either for 30 or for 29 days. So now, so Miriam, you're saying that it's strange that Gematria, or interesting that Gematria can be used as a rationale and a proof. And I mentioned in the previous Shiur that the Rambam says this clearly isn't a proof, which makes sense with the Rambam, fits in with his rationalist approach. It's not a proof. It's just what we call an asmachta. It's nice to connect it to a verse as a way of remembering. So one could understand that it was derived from Gematria, but one could also understand, as many of the drashot, that things aren't actually derived from there. Also, the counting, not necessarily derived from there, really from the concept of a month. And then it's a question of which month are you going by, a 29-day month or a 30-day month? As we know, the months alternate almost, every month, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30. In fact, we'll get to this at the end of the daf, kind of why they alternate 29, 30, 29, 30. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but we'll talk about it in the daf as well. So now, right, in other words, theoretically, in case it's not clear, each one should really be 29 and a half. So we have to compensate. Right? Once in a while, you end up with a few in a row. There's a few exceptions depending on the year, but it's really just to kind of compensate, right, to fill in the gap, because it's really 29 and a half, etc. So now what we did is we brought a Mishnah one by one against Barpada, who said 29, because they all seem to say 30. Then he kind of answers, and a number of the questions against him will result in, once he answers it, like, oh, well, I can prove from the later part in the Mishnah that you didn't quote, that I'm right. And then we have to go back to Rav Matna and say, so how does Rav Matna understand? That was something we did already, and we're going to continue to do. Let's go back to the last question we were up to, which is question number 3. So we have 5 altogether. It's going to be a very easy structure today. Maybe I'll even tell you the whole structure right now, which is we have these 5 questions, which again, we're already in number 3. Then we have, and like I said, we're going to then, kind of figure out how does Rav Matna resolve it once we've resolved the one for Barpada. Then we're going to go into a question that's actually a little bit tricky to understand who exactly the question is addressing. Talk about that. It could be addressing both approaches. It could be just addressing this one opinion in the Mishnah. And then we're going to go to a tannatic debate, Barpada, Rav Matna, or Amoraim, who lived later than the Tanaim, and suggest that maybe this tannatic debate goes under the same lines as Barpada and Rav Matna, and then we're going to reject that. And then once we brought this tannatic debate, we're going to have to figure out one thing that was mentioned in there that we were trying to resolve, that we just need to resolve. That's it. So starting off from the bottom of Hamubet at the bottom, Tnan. Misha Nazal Shtei Nezirut, 3 lines from the bottom. If you took upon yourself 2 periods of nezirut at one time, right? So I'm going to be a Nazir twice. So again, you'll either be 29 and 29 or 30 and 30. You're going to cut your hair, shave your hair off, and do the sacrifices on the 31st day, which sounds like 30 days nezirut, 31st day, you finish it, which is obviously why it's a question on bar pada. And since on the 31st day, you bring your sacrifices, you're already done with your nezirut on day 30, you start counting on day number 31 already, your new period. When you started on day 1, it ended on day 30, it's going to start on day 31 and end on day 60. And then on day 61, right, you're going to do you're going to do your shaving and your sacrifices. That sounds perfectly to Rav Matna, Bishlam Rav Matna Nicha, Ela Bar Pada Kasha. How's Bar Pada can explain if you only need 29 days, it should have been done on day 30. And then again, start on day 31 and then end on day 50, basically day 59, and day 60 will be your, right? Did I just say that right? If it's right, depends. The truth is it's going to really depend whether you count day 30 in both that, right? Can day 30 count, right? The truth is day 30 would be your first day. And then day 59 would be your day that you would already be finished on day 59 because you started, right? It's like starting at 0, right? We started at 1, you ended on day 29. So if you start on day 0, you're going to end on 28. And then, which would be, you start day 30, you end on 58, and then day 59, you would bring your sacrifice. So Amar Lacha, and again, here we're assuming not what we explained yesterday. I said this already in yesterday's class. Yesterday, they had already answered that Rapad, even though he holds ideally the basic law is 29, the rabbis added day 30 just because let's round it. Most people use rounded numbers. Maybe you really did mean 30, even though really 29 is okay. But right now, the Gemara assumes that's not what we're saying. They're going back to square one, and in the end, that's what they're going to answer. Barpada is going to say, I have a proof that I'm totally right from here, because look, Ema Seifa. This is the classic structure we keep having here. Look at the continuation there. This is the ideal, but what does it say after? But if you didn't wait till day 31, and you actually did the shaving on day 30, then your next one, so if you did it on day 30, okay, which means basically you only did 29 days, because he doesn't hold mitzadayom kikulo, we count part of the day as a whole. That's Rav Matna. So day 30 would be basically your korban day. Then you would start the next day, presumably, or you would start that day. You would start on day 30. That would already be your first day. And then again, because ideally you're supposed to count 30. Okay, we haven't said this yet, but we're going to see it in a minute. You're going to then count 30, and then you're going to end up day 60 is your day after. So because 30 is 1, right? And then you're going to end already on 59, and day 60 will be your korban day, your sacrifice day. So what does he say? And how do we know this? Because he says, the Seifa proves my point, because again, if you're Rav Matna, you can't do it on day 30. It doesn't work. You need 30 days, and only after you can do your sacrifice again. Rav Matna, we already know, is going to say mitzadayom kikulo, but let's just leave that aside right now. We assume Rav Matna right now needs 30 days. He said, this proves my point. Day 30 works because, again, the basic halacha is 29. Okay? And they have two major differences. One is 29 versus 30 in the ideal way, right? In the, the ikar hadin, as we say, the base halacha, 29 or 30, even though Barpad in the end requires, which we're going to say right now, Reisha, it says be'omer, but it should be na'aseh ke'omer shlemim, which again meant it's like you said shlemim. We're going to assume, even though you said nothing, and maybe that could be 29, we're going to assume maybe though you meant a whole month, which is 30. So again, Barpad is going to say, number one, he disagrees about the 29, 30, even though practically he'll require 30. Really, by the letter of the law, you only need 29. That's number one. Number two, he doesn't hold that part of the day counts as a whole day, whereas Rav Matna holds, number one, you need 30 days, but he's lenient because part of the day holds like a full day. So we end up with, and that's how all these approaches are going to explain these sources, each one in their own way, because you're going to need each one pulling in one direction and then pulling in the other, right? So Rapada requires less days, even though in the end you kind of need more. And Rav Matna is going to require more, even though in the end you really need less, because part of the day counts as a whole day. So that's how we're going to resolve all these cases according to both. So again, how does this work? So according to Barpada, really, you should do it 30 days, just in case. And then everything happens on day 31. And then 31 is your first day also. And then, right? And then it counts 61 is the day you bring your sacrifices. But if you did any less, it's fine because 29 is really okay by the letter of the law. Ule Rav Matna kasha seifa. But now we're going to push this question back on Rav Matna. How's he going to answer it? Which we already know. He's going to say mitzadeh yom kikulo, right? Because how could he possibly say this works? Because again, he requires 30 days. We assume right now full days. We're going to see in it, but we know not. So again, they're going to say, how could he have possibly done the shaving on the 30th day if he needs 30 days? And then, right, so we're going to say, Amar l'cha Rav Matna k'dekatani seifa yom shloshim oleh lekan ulekan. So he says, there's my proof. The 30th day could count as both. Now mitzadeh yom kikulo works how? It works in a lot of ways. Because the 30th day is going to count, and now let's figure out. You have to count why day 30 it works and day 60, right? So day 30 works because as soon as you got to part of the morning and you did nezirut a little bit, that's fine. You fulfilled your halacha. You fulfilled your day. Not only that, and then you can do the sacrifices on that day, even though you need 30 days. You have 30 days. Also, Yom Shloshim Oleh Lekan Ulekan, which shows what? You can also start counting that as day one, because the end of that day, after you brought your sacrifices over, as soon as you finish your first nezirut, you can, which you did by bringing the sacrifices, you can then start your new one. So then you start on day 30. Your 30th day will be day 59, and day 60 is when you bring your sacrifice. So that works also. But the Gemara is going to have a question on this. And the Gemara asks, wait a minute. So we're still within third Mishnah. Question on Bar Pada, we resolved that. We went to a question on Rav Matna, we resolved that, but we're going to question one thing on this answer to Rav Matna. Mahi, so what's this Mishnah coming to teach you? Mitzadeh yom kikulo? Is this just a numbers game? They're just playing this out? We already know this. You didn't need to write this Mishnah. If it's teaching you mitzadeh yom kikulo, that day 30 can be counted as part of the last day of the previous and part of the first day of the next, because any part of a day counts as both, the same way we count, right? The first day of Shiva, part of the end of the day counts as a whole day, and the last day of Shiva, part of the morning counts. By the way, there's a source here, one of the, I forget who says it, maybe the Tosfot, where they talk about how mitzadeh yom kikulo, by the way, doesn't work from the nighttime, even though the halachic day starts at night, and this is why we do Shiva in the morning. We don't count mitzadeh yom kikulo at night. It comes from here, but anyway, we don't have time for that, but I wanted to just mention it. In any case, he says, so if you say mitzadeh yom kikulo, the Gemara says, and that's what the way Rav Matna reads this Mishnah, we already know that. You don't need a whole Mishnah to start giving us another scenario. It's kind of unnecessary. To which the Gemara answers, what I said so flippantly before is if it's obvious, maybe it's not so obvious that you could use mitzadeh yom kikulo in one day, right? When we did it in Shiva, it was day 1 and day 7. It's 2 different days. So the end of day 1 counts and the beginning of day 7 counts. But here you're counting the same day for both nezirut. Maybe mitzadeh yom kikulo wouldn't go that far to count one day as part of both. Kamash malan, the Mishnah is telling you it could. Again, it's Rav Matna's reading of the Mishnah, not Bar Pada's reading. But according to Rav Matna's reading, it's teaching you mitzadeh yom kikulo, that day could count for both. New Mishnah tonight. So now we're up to question number 4 against Bar Pada. Im gilech yom shishim chaser echad yatsa sheyom shloshim oleh lo min haminyan. So if you shaved on the 59th day, it works. Why? Because the 30th day counts from the minyan. Okay, the 30th day is part of the count. Again, meaning 30th day can count for the beginning of the next. So again, if you start at day 30, day 59 is your 30th day, right? Again, it's easy to think about in terms like this. If you start at day 1, that's when you normally start on a regular nezirut, right? Your 30th day will be day 30. So if you start at 0 at 30, your 59, day 59 is going to be your 30th day. And again, mitzadeh yom kikulo. So bishlam ala Rav Matna nicha. To Rav Matna, this makes perfect sense. Because in the second term, mitzadeh yom kikulo, day shloshim is the first. You're supposed to wait till day 60 because you're supposed to wait till after 30 days. But if you did it on the 30th day, it's fine. And the 30th day in this case is going to be day 59. That was the way we read all those Mishnayot, right? Ideally on day 31, but if you did on day 30, it's okay because we could say Mitzad Yom Kikula. But the Bar Pada Lamami, Hamar Shloshim Chaser Echad. But to Bar Pada, this again is a very unnecessary Mishnah. Why is it an unnecessary Mishnah? Because he says Shloshim Chaser Echad, right? He says you only need 29. So you don't need to tell us Im Gilach Yom Shishim Chaser Echad Yatsa. That's the halacha. You don't need more than that. It's fine. So Amar Lecha, Ana Nami Aha Samche. To which he says, that exactly is my proof. In other words, I rely on this Mishnah to prove my point. Instead of saying, why do you need this Mishnah? He twists it around and says, that's where I get my proof from. Because the fact that 59 works shows that I'm right. Okay, because 59 again is 20 it's the 30th day. I'm sorry, it's according to this, it would be, if you did it on day 30, it would be your 29th, right? No, it would be your 30th day, right? So I'm gonna right. So that's the thing. According to Bar Pada, according to Rav Matna, Yom Shloshim Oleh Lekanu Lekan, right? You could count it as both because Mitzad Yom Kikula. Bar Pada doesn't hold Mitzad Yom Kikula, and I want to read you the Rush here and how he understands this line. Okay, so if you look at the Rush and this Mesechet is on the outside section. I'm sorry, I see some people are saying the video is a little choppy. I don't know, a few minutes ago it said my internet connection's unstable, so I apologize. Hopefully it's gonna smooth out in a minute. So Amar Lecha Bar Pada, if you look in the Rush is on the outside section, and he says, this is where Mikan Ani Lomed the stam nezirut Kaftet Yom. This is where I learned it from, and now we're going to see how he learns it. Okay, he's going to explain it very clearly. Since I'm just going to paraphrase the Rush. I'm not going to read it inside in Hebrew also, but I'm going to paraphrase as I'm going to read it in Hebrew and at the same time translate. From the fact that it says that the 30th day counts, Leminyan Hashini, in other words, he says the 30th day counts for the next source. Okay, everything's plugged into my computer and it's plugged in directly at the modem, so it's just my internet. There's nothing I could do. So now they say the following. Since it says Yom Shloshim Oleh Leminyan Hasheni, he says day 30 counts for the next count. Okay, because of that, he's saying it must be that in order to do it on day 59, it's only because day 30 counts as your first day. If day 30 counts as your first day, right? Just again, let's go back. If it's day 1, then day 30 is your 30th day. If day 0, right, but basically you're counting 30, then day 30 will be day 59. And then why will that work? Because then, right, the nezirut, basically, he doesn't, a third disagreement between him, and this is why I wanted to point it out, besides they disagree 29-30, and Mitzad Yom Kikulo, and which I guess is connected to Mitzad Yom Kikulo, you can't count it for both. Okay, either it's the end of the first or it's the beginning of the next. So since he holds ideally right from the letter of the law 29 is enough, day 30 is you're going to be able to start counting. If you don't say that, you won't be able to start counting according to him already your next section. And therefore he says from the 29th day, it proves it's already done, because otherwise the 30th day would still be from your previous one. Again, because he doesn't know Mitzad Yom Kikulo, so you can't say it also counts as the beginning of the next. And then you wouldn't be able to start counting that from there. So the fact that 59 works proves that 30 must be from the second count and not from the previous count, which shows 29 is really enough by the letter of the law. Again, this is all if you did it. So he's basically, that's how he proves it according to the Rush from that Mishnah. Fifth and last Mishnah for now, although we will take a sixth Mishnah, and that will be a little more complicated what that's actually coming for. But right now, go to Mishnah number 5, fifth question on Bar Pada. Misha Amal Hareini Nazir, Nitma Yom Shloshim Soteret Hakol. This is a pretty bad situation. You spent your 30 days of nezirut, although we'll see one that even gets worse. And on day number 30, you became impure to a dead body. Now, what happens? You have to start all over again. Now, obviously, this is a question for Bar Pada, because if 29 days is enough, if it happened on the 30th day, you shouldn't have to start all over again. So Bishlam ala Rav Matna nicha, ela bar pada kasha. So this clearly works for Rav Matna, but doesn't work for bar pada, right? Because Rav Matna needs 30 days. Although again, you might say mitzad yom kikulo, and we'll get back to that. And then it should be enough as long as it happened after a few minutes in the morning. But anyway, Amar lecha bar pada says, I can prove it to you from the Seifa, Ema Seifa. Rabbi Eliezer omer eno soter ala shiva. There's a machloket here. So what does he say? Rabbi Eliezer says, you're only soter 7 days. What does that mean? There is no such thing as 7-day nezirut. But what's 7 days? Becoming pure from being impure to a dead person. It's a 7-day procedure. Now, clearly what happened here, and we didn't say this, but it's obvious, morning of the 30th day, before you did your shaving and sacrifices, you became impure to the dead. So you can't bring your sacrifices now because you're impure to the dead. You can't go to the temple. So what do? You wait 7 days, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Why does he say you wait 7 days? Because Father's going to say, he obviously thinks it's enough because you already finished your nezirut. So Bar Pada proves his point from Rabbi Eliezer. And he says, if you're going to say that you need 30 days, then Rabbi Eliezer would have to start you from the beginning. So he basically said, my opinion matches Rabbi Eliezer perfectly. Okay, maybe not Tanakama, who requires you to start again, but my opinion clearly matches Rabbi Eliezer, because you can't have Rabbi Eliezer if you think that you need 30 full days. You don't have 30 full days here, and you'd have to start again. So he proves his point through Rabbi Eliezer. Now here, the Gemara is missing a line, which is very critical, which is, what does Rav Matna do? Okay, the same thing we kept saying at the end of all the answers to Rav Pada, which is, well, how can Rav Matna explain his approach according to Rabbi Eliezer? And we already kind of know the answer, which is, because according to him, you need 30 days. But again, what doesn't he require? 30 complete days. As long as you had part of the day, it was enough. So kasava Rabbi Eliezer mitzad yom kekula. So now the Gemara is explaining how would Rav Matna understand this? He would say part of the day is considered like a full day. So again, let's just read this Mishnah according to Bar Pada and Rav Matna. Bar Pada will say, the rabbis, it's not clear what Bar Pada says about the rabbis and why they need you to start all over again. Okay, maybe the rabbis are taking according to him. Remember, he said you really need 30 days, 29 isn't enough, even though, yes, by the letter of the law, 29 is enough, but you really need 30. The rabbis instituted because we assume you use round numbers. So therefore, maybe the rabbis are being strict in saying, therefore, you have to start all over again, because he doesn't hold mitzad yom kikulo in general, right? Bar Pada. And Rabbi Eliezer says you're done with your nezirut by the letter of the law. You've done 29. You certainly don't need to start all over again. Rav Matna will say that the rabbis, now Rav Matna is going to only work according to Rabbi Eliezer, all the answers we gave for Rav Matna. Rav Matna is going to say, every time he kept saying mitzad yom kikulo, we're now going to say whether or not we employ mitzad yom kikulo is a machloka between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. Rabbi Eliezer says we can use it, and that's why if you got impure on the 30th day, as long as you did some of the day, you're fine. The rabbis will say, no, you need 30 complete days. Okay, that's what seems to be here. So it's going to get a little tricky, this next section. This next section has perplexed a lot of the commentaries, and there's different ways to understand. Some people say this is a question on Rav Matna, although that raises a number of problems. It's the Meiri's commentary, and the Meiri, some people say it must have had a different version of the text because it doesn't really fit so well. And other people say it's really a question. You could either explain it on both approaches, Bar Pada and Rav Matna, or maybe it's really a directed question on Rabbi Eliezer himself, because we just explained Rabbi Eliezer, and maybe this is an outgrowth of what we just said. Okay, so in any case, there's a little confusion here about how to read it. Try to make some sense out of it and read it in a way that we can have it make sense. Tanan. So now they say the next Mishnah actually raises an issue, perhaps with what we just said. Because we just said Rabbi Eliezer holds mitzad yom kikulo, and if you get impure on the 30th day, right, you don't have to wait another 30, you don't have to count your nezirut all over again. You only have to wait the 7 days to become pure. So now it says, Hareini Nazir mea yom. If you were a Nazir for 100 days, nitma yom mea soter et hakol. If you became impure on the 100th day, messes up all your days, you have to start from the beginning. Okay, this is much worse. Like I told you, this could get worse. This is much worse. Forget about 30 days. Here you waited 100 days, and now on day number 100, you're about to bring your sacrifices and you become impure to a dead person. You now have to start all over again. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Eino soter ela. Now, what would you expect him to say from what we just learned? 7 days, right? You just have to wait 7 days because you finished, but it's not what it says in the Mishnah. And that's why I think the reading that this is a question of Rabbi Eliezer makes the most sense, because he doesn't really make any sense here. Forget about Bar Pada, Rav Matna, it just Rabbi Eliezer's approach doesn't make sense. Eino soter ela shloshim yom. He says you have to start all over, but not from day one. You have to do a 30-day period of nezirut, a stam Nazir shloshim yom. The Isa kadatach Rabbi Eliezer. That's why this really seems to be a question on the conclusion from the last section. If you say that Savar Rabbi Eliezer mitzad yom kikulo, like we just explained, that part of the day is like a complete day, nistor shiva. It should only be 7 days you have to wait because you got already to day 100. The beginning of day 100 counts as a complete day. It should be fine. And ilo savar mitzad yom kikulo. And if, let's say, we reject what we answered earlier, and we say he doesn't hold mitzad yom kikulo, listor kulu, then it should cancel out all the days, and you should have to go back to day 0, right, day 1, and count 100 days again. So this 30-day doesn't make sense according to any interpretation, really. Whether we're using it as a question on the previous, it's just saying it really doesn't make any sense. To which the Gemara answers, lo olam lo amrina mitzad yom kikulo. And here's where it makes the Gemara complicated. Because now we're going to say that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold mitzad yom kikulo, which actually is going to raise a problem on the previous section. And the Gemara doesn't respond to it. The Gemara doesn't say at this point, wait a minute, then how do we go back and explain the previous? And that's what makes this Gemara very complicated, because they just don't. The conclusion of the very last section was Rabbi Eliezer says 7 days because he says mitzad yom kikulo, you got to day 30, you became impure. That was enough to count as the whole. Right now they're going to say he doesn't hold mitzad yom kikulo. So that's problem number 1, which is how does this relate to the previous sugya? And it doesn't really say so in the text. But the second problem is we just gave 2 tracks. We said either he holds mitzad yom kikulo, in which case it should be only 7 days, or he doesn't hold mitzad yom kikulo, and then it should be 100 days. Either which way, it didn't answer our question. So the Gemara is going to resolve at least that issue, even though it's not going to go back to the previous section. Ihachi listor kulu. So then it should cancel all the days, and you should have to count 100 new days. So Amar Rish Lakish, Hainu Tama de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer's reasoning is the following: Amar Kra, Zot Torah Nazir biyom melot yemei nizro. Here's a pasuk. It says, this is the rules for the Nazir on the day he finishes all of his days of nezirut. Okay, and then it says, right, he goes to Petach Moed, he shaves his hair, he does this, all that. But what do they say here? They say, what's so special about this Yom Melot? There's a special dispensation. HaTorah amra nitma b'Yom Melot, tein lo Torah Nazir. If you got to the very last day and you messed up, like you said 100 days, and now you're stuck, tein lo Torah Nazir. You just have to keep a period of nezirut. In other words, there's a special dispensation for getting messed up on the very last day. We'll allow it. Even though we don't generally hold mitzad yom kikulo, we're going to let this go, but we're not going to let it go completely. We're not going to say only 7 days. We're going to say do 1 period of nezirut. Now, this is very difficult to understand because if we're saying that this is to explain Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't explain Rabbi Eliezer in the previous section, as I said. Rabbi Eliezer in the previous section didn't say that. If it's 30 days, you only have 7 days. If it's 100 days, then you only have to do 1 period of nezirut, a full period, but a 30-day period. So it's very unclear here what's happening. I don't have a good answer. One of the commentaries says that what's happening here is there must be a difference between stam nezirut, where Rabbi Eliezer will hold mitzad yom kikulo, because you didn't actually say a specific amount. But if you say 100 days, maybe, again, there's 2 options here. Either you meant full days, and that's why you can't employ mitzad yom kikulo here, but will be lenient and only make you do 30. Or maybe you said 100 shleimim. Maybe the case is, even though they didn't say so. Again, there's a lot missing here from the Gemara, which makes it difficult to understand what's happening, which is then you would say 100 complete days, okay? And again, how this fits in with Bar Pada, Rav Matna, there's a bunch of different options about how to understand this. Some people say the questions are Rav Matna, but then the answer of Rish Lakish really only works according to Bar Pada because again, it's talking in terms of we don't hold mitzadeh kikulo, and Rav Matna did hold mitzadeh kikulo, which makes it very complicated. Again, some people say it's really a question of Rav Matna, but then we ended up explaining according to Bar Pada, and then you'd have to say that even Rav Matna would say it's a case where he said complete 100 days. So I'm leaving you with a bunch of questions because there really are some questions about how to read the simple reading of this. Okay, so your question, it's a good question. Do you need 100 days for this special dispensation to apply? It's not clear. I would guess that what it means here is anything above 30 days, you would always go to the default of 30 days if that happened on your last day, according to this reading of Rabbi Eliezer. That's how I would understand Rish Lakish's position. I don't think 100 is just an example of something over 30. Okay, so I'm sorry that I'm leaving you with some questions. It's a little bit complicated. It's a little bit confusing. The simpler reading to me seems like it's really questioning Rabbi Eliezer, and then it's answering Rabbi Eliezer. The problem is that in the end, it doesn't really relate to the previous Rabbi Eliezer, and you have to add in that, again, this would be a case where you said 100 complete days rather than stam nezirut, where you didn't mention complete or incomplete or anything else, and you can employ mitzadeh kikulo when you're not specific. When you get specific, maybe you can't, and maybe that's the best way to understand. Okay, so before we go on, I'm just going to quickly share my screen and just go through according to what we saw here. I put on the chart already from yesterday where we started with the question. So we started with stam nezirut 30 yom, which when we explained according to Bar Pada, then we had the Mishomer Hareini Nazir. You do it on the 31st day, which again was a question to Bar Pada, but then he quoted the Seifa, which said, but if you did it on the 30th day, it works, which shows I'm right, which then we had to explain according to Rav Matna. And then we had the 2 time periods of nezirut, which again, they all counts, all seem to match 30 days and not 29, to which again, he said, oh, but in the less ideal world, if you did it, it works. That proves my point, to which we had to explain it all according to Rav Matna. Then we had this case of the continuation of that Mishnah. If it's 60 minus 1, Yom Shloshim Olelo Min Minyan, which seemed unnecessary according to Bar Pada, to which he says, I can prove my whole theory from there, which is why I need it. That's where I get my whole proof. And then we had the last one, which is if you said Hareini Nazir, Nitma Yom Shloshim Soteret Hakol, right, which sounded like you have to go back to the beginning because you didn't keep 30 full days or 30 days, to which we brought in Rabbi Eliezer to prove Bar Pada to say, but look at Shita Rabbi Eliezer. Again, the fact that he says you only need 7 clearly proves my point, because otherwise you'd need to go back to the beginning. So again, and then we had to explain it according to Rav Matna, which was easy because he'll just say mitzadeh kikulo. And then we had this question, which is either on Rav Matna or maybe on Rabbi Eliezer, according to both Rav Matna and Bar Pada, and we resolved the question. Okay, now, as I said, we're going to go to a suggestion that there's a machloket between 2 Tanaim, and that's going to match up to Bar Pada and Rav Matna. Actually, I'll keep the share screen going and you can see it charted out. So now, and here I brought actually the whole pasuk, so it's helpful. Lema kitanai. Lema, as we've seen before, is a suggestion that we're going to ultimately reject. Let's suggest that it's a machloket tanaim. Ad milot hayamim. So let's read the whole pasuk. Kol yemei neder nizro, all the days of your nezirut. Ta'ar lo ya'avor al rosho. Do not shave your head. Ad milot hayamim asher yazir lashem, until you complete the days that you became a nazir to God. So ad milot hayamim. The first opinion is going to be Rabbi Yoshiya. Oftentimes in a tannatic source, you only end up with hearing who it is at the end of his line. So we'll see in a minute, Divrei Rabbi Yoshiya. Shom'ani mi'ut yamim shnayim. It says until you finish the days. Now, days is often 2. Okay, we had this whole discussion, what days is, etc. But we're not going to go back there right now. They're saying, the minimum for days normally would be just 2. Talmud lomar kadosh yeh gadel pera. Gidul se'ar pachot mishloshim. But from the pasuk of he should be sanctified, gadel pera, right? Grow his hair long. What do we know? Any less than 30 days is not really considered hair growth that's going to be noticeable. We learned that from the Kohen already. Therefore, right, that's where he gets it from, that it's 30 days. Divrei Rabbi Yoshiya. This seems to be very similar to Rav Matna, who basically says, we learn from Kadosh Yeh, the Yeh b'gematria is 30, and it's 30 days. So that all matches Rav Matna perfectly. Rabbi Yonatan omer, eno tzarich. Rabbi Yonatan says, you don't need this. Harehu omer, ad milot hayamim. Okay, he quotes, he says, notice, not from Kadosh Yeh, it said ad milot hayamim. I eluhen yamim shetzrichim lemalot. What are days that need filling in? Now I go back to what I said in the beginning about the Rosh Chodesh. right? Sometimes if you have a 29-day month, the next month you need to fill it in and have a complete day because you missed out on a half day there. Hevei omer shloshim. So now he says, that's how we get to what are days that you need filling. It's not 2 days. You can learn it from this pasuk. In other words, Rabbi Yoshiya tried to say you can't learn from this pasuk, Ad Melot Yamim, about the length of the Nazir period, the time period of Nazir, because it could be Yamim, could be 2. Rabbi Yonatan says, what do you mean? Ad Melot Yamim is clearly talking about a month because there's no such thing as filling in 2 days. The thing that needs filling in is our months. That's why they go back and forth. 29, 30, 29, 30. They need filling in. So that's shloshim, which he basically means, now here it gets a little tricky. They're going to say this matches Bar Pada. Why? Because again, Bar Pada was all about the month. And therefore, month, shloshim, he says shloshim, but maybe he really means 29. It's a little bit of a stretch, but we're going to reject it anyway. My laugh, Rav Matna damar Rabbi Yoshiya, Bar Pada damar Rabbi Yonatan. Again, because Bar Pada said 29 days like the days of the month, which is something that needs limalot. So Rabbi Yonatan, even though he said shloshim, what he really meant was a month, which could be 29 or 30. So that's what they think the debate is about, to which they say, no. Why not? Amar lecha Rav Matna. Rav Matna could explain both according to him. Rav Matna could say really both mean 30. They're just learning it from different psukim. And what motivated the different psukim? Well, kule ama shloshim b'ina. Number one, everybody says 30. Also Rabbi Yoshiya, also Rabbi Yonatan. V'hacha v'ad ba'ad bichlal pligi. Their debate is when you said ad milot, when you have in the Torah the word ad, until. It's always a question, right? Whenever you discuss with someone, you say, I'll be here till 6. Does that mean until before 6 or until through 6 o'clock? Maybe you mean through the end of 6 o'clock, meaning almost till 7. There's different ways to understand. That's not as confusing, but there's times that you could say, read until page 50, right? This is a classic. Teacher gives an assignment, read till page 50, right? Let's say it's a textbook where, it doesn't necessarily end of a chapter, right? So you don't know, are you supposed to read page 50? You're not supposed to read page 50. So Rabbi Yoshiya savar ad velo ad bichlal. Ad means not until, but not including. So ad melot yamim, he didn't want to learn from their 30 days because that would mean until, but not including day 30. And that would come out as 29. And that's why he chose not to use that pasuk. That's why he chose the pasuk, kadosh yihiyeh, right? And he says, gadel pera, how long do you grow your hair? 30 days. Because he couldn't use that other pasuk. Rabbi Yonatan savar ad va'ad bichlal. Rabbi Yonatan says, no, ad includes those days. Ad melot yamim is ad and including day 30. So basically they both wanted to get to 30. They just had to use a different verse because one had an issue with his view of how we read every time in the Torah it says ad. Ad always means up to and not including, according to Rabbi Yoshiya. So basically, he said, let's learn it from somewhere else, which ended up being the same pasuk that Rav Matna learned, but not because, he agrees with Rav Matna, and the other person also agrees with Rav Matna because his approach was ad includes, and I have a different way to get to 30. Like we said before, it's not like he necessarily learned it from the gematria. It's just, that was his approach, and meaning they both hold 30. It's not like one held 29 and one held 30. That's really the end. But since they mentioned something in the Braita, they want to clarify a little bit and say, is that really the case? So basically, before we get to this very last point, I just want to summarize 5 questions against Bar Pada from the Mishnayot, one by one, in the third chapter of Nazir. One by one, we answered every question. Many of them, in turn, caused us to have an issue with Rav Matna, which we resolved. Then we moved to this one question, which is a little confusing and possibly just trying to understand Rabbi Eliezer's approach. How it fits in with Bar Pada, Rav Matna wasn't so clear. And then we tried to say maybe the debate between them was also a tannatic debate. However, we resolved it by saying no, we rejected it by saying it's not a tannatic debate. And they both actually hold 30 like Rav Matna, which by the way, we can assume is the standard position because the mission does seem pretty clear, stam, nezirut, shloshim yom. Even though we resolved it all according to Bar Pada, they were weak proofs, right? And Rav Matna does seem to be the standard, stam, nezirut, shloshim yom. So now Amar Mar. Amar Mar is always a quote from something we mentioned before. Now let's go into it and try to understand it better. What did we say? According to Rabbi Yonatan, how did he learn milot? Milot must be 30 because what are days that need filling in? As we explained very clearly, months. And months are 30 days. ve'ema Shabbat. So now they suggest maybe Shabbat, maybe it should just be a week. Okay, maybe it means, right, to complete the week. What does it mean, right? Things that you need to complete the week. Maybe that's what it means, until the completion of a week. Maybe nezirut is only a week. Right? This is similar to the yamim. How do we know yamim is this and not that? Similar thing here. How do we know that melot is months? To which the Gemara answers, Shabbat mi'ika, right? Shabbat also doesn't necessarily mean the day Shabbat. It means a week. That's what a Shabbat is, a week. Maybe it just means a week. To which he said, Shabbat mi'ika chaseruta. There's no gaps in the week that you need to fill in. It's not like the months where sometimes it's right. Sometimes it's a smaller month. Sometimes it's a shorter month. Sometimes it's a longer month, and you need to fix it, right? The week, every week is always the exact same amount of days. There's no incomplete something that needs filling in. So it can't possibly be that. But we will ask another question, which we'll get to tomorrow. Maybe it's a year, because the years, sometimes there's leap years. Right? There's a gap because our calendar is based on the lunar and the solar together. And sometimes we are missing days and you need to add in a full month. So maybe it would be a year and not a month. So we'll get to that tomorrow. We'll finish up that the very beginning of tomorrow's daf and start the new Mishnah. Wishing everybody a Shavua Tov, and let's hope for B'sorot Tovot, good news. And we need some more positive things going on. Have a great day, everyone.